Good evening. I would like to call the Fairmont City Council work session to order. Today is Tuesday, June 9th, and it is 5 p.m. If the city clerk would do a roll call of members, please.
Mayor Bolliard,
Present.
Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Moran, Councilmember Horton, Councilmember Wade,
Here.
Councilmember Weber,
Here.
Councilmember Soul,
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel,
Here.
Councilmember Newsom.
I make a motion to excuse Deputy Mayor Rice and Councilmember Newsom. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Moving on, we are going to consideration of work session business. What we're here to learn about is the sign ordinance presentation. I will turn it over to our city planner, Mr. Shea Strait.
Mayor, members of council, thank you very much. So I'm going to walk you through. I have a presentation with this. I do want to let you know that the packet I have printed out for you all is exactly what you're going to see on the screen. And so sometimes the font might be a little bit too small and so forth on the presentation. So if you just want to get any more detail than what you can read there, you can go and check the page out on the packet that will have that information in particular. So I am excited to bring this forward to you all. We have been working on a sign code amendment for years now. We have gone back and forth, lots of different staff, lots of research. These things are very difficult to get right, and they're very complicated. So we've spent a lot of time on this, and I want to just preface by saying the initial reason we decided to take this on over other code amendment projects right now is because of the substantial impact this has on our businesses. And it is a regular occurrence for this to be one of the biggest complaints that we receive in planning and development from local businesses. They really struggle with our sign code. In addition, our existing code now, it can take our staff in planning and development anywhere between half an hour to more than an entire workday to review a single sign permit application, because they can get that complex under our existing regulations. There's so many exemptions, little add-ons, and various interpretations. And the sign manufacturers as well do not like our existing sign code. They also struggle to navigate it as well. So I think if all the experts are struggling with it and local businesses don't like it, this is definitely something we can all agree on needs some update. And so what we've proposed as a quick summary is we are streamlining these regulations. And what I mean by that is we are condensing the information so that pertinent information is stated with brevity and clarity. So this helps remove some of the ambiguity in these regulations. And if you compare the new code to our existing code online, you can see where several different sections here are much shorter. Permits and inspections, for example, is now just a single column of text. Same with prohibited signs. Sign measurements, how we measure a sign, is now based on graphics. Illuminated signs is now broken down into 4 types and has much greater detail about regulating illumination. That's actually important, and I'll get into that in a few moments. And all information for the signs that require a permit are now on a single page. One sheet of paper tells you everything you need to know about one type of sign. It's that simple. So it's great for sign manufacturers and businesses alike. There are now, and as I'm going to walk you through all of this, but there are 3 permitted sign categories, and then there's an additional category at the end. There's on-premise signs. These are signs you need a permit for, with one exception. There's permanent exempt signs. These are signs that are regulated, that might stay up, but you don't need to get a permit. There's temporary exempt signs. These are the ones you would think about, opening soon banner, or we have a public event coming up and you put a little sign out saying, you know, the car show is happening on this date, and so forth. Those are the temporary signs. And then the last category, and at the end of this proposed set of text amendments, is off-premise signs, also known as billboards, but off-premise is a more national, typical term used to describe these, to help separate them out from other sign types and uses. So here is my general overview of all this. I'm just going to summarize what's up here. Current code has 20 subsections. We are narrowing that down to 12. And just to reference how confusing our existing code is, there are 2 sections that do the same thing but have different standards in them, and it's a non-conforming sign section. Just to, once again, our current code's a patchwork, so we really need to get it revised and buttoned up. The other thing that we're doing that I'll walk through, we're creating a heritage sign type. This is going to be important for historic preservation and community culture. We're summarizing non-conforming signs down to 2 paragraphs. That's all the regulations there will be on those. Prohibited signs is, like I said, a single column, very clearly written out. And then the other thing that we're going to do, and I'm really excited about, is on-premise signs. So the ones you need a permit for, there's much more options now than what exists in our current code. So we're actually expanding that, and I'll talk about that more. And then we've expanded the categories of permanent exempt and temporary exempt to include more signs than those 2 categories had ever before, making it easier on folks. And we've also taken many of those standards between those 2 categories, the exempt signs, and made them generally the same for most of those sign types. So once again, it's much easier to go, well, how long can I leave a temporary sign up? And it's almost always going to be 30 days. And it's much easier if we can just tell everybody, well, it's 30 days. Doesn't matter if it's an event advertisement or an opening soon sign, they're all 30 days, right? For the most part. So things like that, that'll improve the quality of life for everyone. So in the open sections here, so these are pages 2 through 4. That's where I'm talking about the streamlining part of this. So we have the purpose. This is always a very important thing we do in zoning regulations, land use regulations. You should state your intent. Why are we even regulating this? And the reason that's important is so that when we make changes in the future, or when we go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and we're seeking out a variance or special exemption, we can understand why we're regulating it to make sure that any variance or exception given is within the intent of what we're trying to regulate and why. Next part is all the general rules that apply to all signs. These are things like you can't build a sign that blocks the view at an intersection, and so forth. So that's all of our general regulations. You also can't build a sign that encroaches on the pedestrian pathway, so where people walk. And that's regardless if it's a public street or a sidewalk on private property. You can't erect a sign that is in a pedestrian pathway at all. And we've created a nice little graphic there. You can see the person kind of standing on a sidewalk, and it shows a sign above them, a sidewalk sign next to them. And it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little barber pole on the side of the building. I just wanted to make a statement about that myself. So I put that in the graphic of how far something can intrude in based on ADA into a pathway. We call those obstructions. Next is how to get a permit, what maintenance looks like, and inspections. That's on page 3. Straightforward and to the point. So it's going to work the same way it has now. Nothing about that is changing. It's just much more clearly written. Page 4, though, this is where now we're getting into our first substantial changes. So if you join me on page 4, at the top there, you'll see heritage signs. I'm going to give you an example. Belmont Motor Lodge, Belmont Inn. We have that old painted billboard right on the back of one of our downtown historic buildings. That is an example of something that might be a heritage sign. And so these are signs for businesses that are no longer in operation, but now we've kind of identified with them as part of our culture, part of our history and our community. Maybe we want to preserve them. Otherwise, when a business closed and their signs are still up, we'd have them removed. But sometimes these things, we want to keep them around for those reasons. So this is a new sign type in which somebody could apply to the Historic Preservation Review Commission to have one of those old signs declared a heritage sign so that that property owner can maintain that in perpetuity and keep that cultural element here in our city. This also requires that a list of these is maintained by the planning department, so we know exactly which ones are heritage signs and which ones are not signs that are meant to be preserved at this time. The next part is the non-conforming sign regulations. This explains how we treat existing non-conforming signs. That means a sign that doesn't meet our current regulations. That's all non-conforming means. Maybe it's a setback, maybe it's too big, maybe it's too tall or too wide, or it sits in a place it shouldn't, or it's a type maybe that we've prohibited. And so those are all non-conforming signs, and then how we handle those. The other thing we did at the bottom of that section is talk about what happens if you want to alter one, and what are you allowed to do and not allowed to do. And we just make that very clear. As long as you don't make it more non-conforming, you can alter it and relocate it. So you can keep that sign. So you don't need to get rid of it, as long as you don't make it worse. Prohibited signs. So this is a just brief section here, A through K, that lists all the prohibited signs. I'm not going to read them off, but these are essentially the same as we had previously in our ordinance. It's just, once again, kind of summarized a little better. This includes any mechanically activated signs, flashing signs, anything like that that could cause a distraction and a safety issue, or signs that are a physical barrier or safety hazard. So on to the next few pages here. Our new sign measurement section here on page 5 is graphic based. The little red dashes you see around everything, that's sign area. That's how we measure it. So makes it real simple of like, well, oh, okay, that's the area of a sign. And this one, you do it by the letters, and this one's 3D, so you do it by all the facings. And this way you know how to measure your signs when you have to do width, length, height, and total sign area. The next page is page 6. This is more measurements at first. So one is the sign height graphic, fell onto the next page. So it shows you how we measure the height of a sign, and it's to the most vertical element of that sign structure. As you can see demonstrated with the yard sign, where it's actually measured to the top of the post and not the top of the graphic itself. Vertical clearance, in other words, you have to keep a sign so high above the pedestrian pathway, but that's one of the standards we regulate for many sign types so that they're not a hazard to people walking down sidewalks or other paths. Many of those, and just real quick, any of the references to pedestrian pathways almost all have to deal with the Americans with Disability Act. So that's to keep clear travels a path for anybody who may have limited mobility, and to make sure we're always aware that includes people who may have limited vision or folks that are blind. So, and that's why there's the vertical clearance, and we just don't ask people to duck out of the way. Shaquille O'Neal is kind of out of luck, so 7 feet is the cutoff, but for the average person, this takes care of those. So that's why we always make sure we measure that and we regulate it. The last part of page 6, which goes on to page 7, and is the entirety of page 7 as well, this is illumination. So Councilmember Weber, I know we were speaking about this just a moment ago before we began the work session. And this part is our most technical part of any sign code. And to summarize it, there are 4 types of illuminated signs. So you have external, in other words, there's lights on the outside shining on it. Then you have internal. You have lights inside of it. So think about those vinyl panel signs that are illuminated from back behind. You don't see the lights, but the sign lights up. Then you have direct illumination. Those are going to be a couple different things. Those are going to be neon tubes, and they're also going to be like direct luminaires, incandescent bulbs, like you think on a marquee sign, it's got all the light bulbs on it. Those are direct illumination. Those are the ones that are actually most limited, but they're most limited by other rules here in this code. And then the last one is what we call an EMC, Electronic Message Center. This is a very broad term that includes any electronic sign in which you can change the content through a computer or other digital device so that it changes in display. So all those are considered EMCs. And what we've done for illumination is we regulate it by zoning district of where you could have these different types of illumination. So this way we can try to, especially in a residential area, there might be a business there, but maybe we don't want the sign to be too bright or too intrusive to that area, and so on and so forth. The next side of this on page 7 is where we really get into the details here. This is much more technical, and the reason being is if you do not measure the illumination of something appropriately, if you don't know how to use a light meter, and you don't understand how light works in airspace, because light, as we think about it moving in a straight line. But when it comes to measuring light, that's not how it works. It actually gets refracted by the air, and so light ends up looking like a big bubbly cloud. So depending on where you're standing or how you're looking at it, it can change your measurements. So it's really important that we have very clear standards about how we measure illuminated signs so that we're not unfair to a business that does have one. And we also make sure that they're safe and aren't too bright, causing glare or other types of safety issues. Or even one of the other things, probably the most common phone call we get about lights in the planning and development department is when somebody has something that is creating light trespassing. In other words, it's illuminating someone else's property. So it's shining in someone's living room window or bedroom window, and so forth. And we do get a lot of those because it's really cheap and easy to go get a big LED light nowadays, and people put those big spotlights up, and then the next thing you know, you're in your living room and it looks like it's daylight outside almost when those turn on. So that's our most common call that we get complaining about that. But we do have very clear standards here about all those. There's also clear standards about the electronic message centers. And the reason being is because those are the number one safety issue when it comes to illuminated signs. So EMCs, if they are not programmed correctly or not functioning properly or are unregulated, can create distractions for motorists, which then increases the number of collisions with both other motorists, real property, and pedestrians. So we want to keep that to a minimum. So we just make very clear standards for that, such as anything that comes up on an EMC has to be there for 8 seconds or more. And the transition time from one graphic to another cannot be more than 2 seconds. So it has to transition quickly, and it has to stay up for a period of time. So if we think about 8 seconds, that's long enough for you to probably read the basic text on there. But if it changes too fast, you might get distracted by it, by your brain automatically trying to receive that information. So these are the recommended national standards for these by the International Sign Council. Then we also have hours of illumination down here. So signs can only be illuminated during the hours of operation for an establishment, but pole and monument signs in a front yard can be exempt from that. So those are the only ones that are exempt from that rule, because most often that's how most folks build and use their signs anyways. So if that's how folks are doing it and there's no safety issue we can perceive about it and no one's complaining about it, then we might as well make it permitted. So that's a regulation that we have there that's a little different from what we have now. Our current code is that when you close your business, all signs have to get turned off. But one of the issues we have with that is often pole and monument signs are not programmed with a switch to turn off after hours. Especially if you go look at any of the shopping centers, Country Club, Marion Square, their pole signs do not shut off as each business closes throughout the day or opens up. They just stay on. So this makes that consistent and fair for everyone. Next part is when we get into the real meat and potatoes of what's happening here with the sign code. So if we go to page 8, now we are at on-premise signs. Now we're in the real regulations. Here's where you come get your permits, and you're opening a new business, or you're trying to get signs for your nonprofit or anything else. Here's what you can do and where you can do it and how big it can be. It's all right here in this section. So the first thing you'll notice, lots of charts. We're trying to make it very quick to get information. The table 5.3.c sign types, that lists all the signs that you can get. And as you can see, there's a whole list there, 13 of them, that you could obtain. And this is a much more expanded list than what we currently have. Then over on the right-hand side, you can see the maximum square footage. This is based on zoning district, so that as you're in the more neighborhood or pedestrian-oriented areas, you would have smaller total signage. And as you get to the more highway-oriented, car-oriented areas, you would have larger signs, because you need larger signs because people are moving a lot faster. So you need to get that information to be able to be seen from a much greater distance, which is why you can see in the technology district, they have the highest threshold at 400 square feet. per establishment, per street frontage, because they're mostly oriented towards the interstate rather than NASA Boulevard itself. We also clarify several other things in here about certain types of signs and special regulations for those, like multi-tenant or non-conforming use signs and civic uses where they have special exceptions or special limitations. We also state that anything in a historic district still has to get historic district approval if it's an on-premise sign. That's really important. I'm going to get to that towards the tail end of this. So page 9 is our first type of sign. I'm not going to read all these regulations verbatim, but it's an awning sign. In other words, this is those canvas signs. These are literally usually made of canvas or some other type of material. They're not like a hard metal canopy. They can be, but they're usually not. They're usually canvas. And these are different from canopy signs, and I'll explain how in just a moment. So we just say you can make that a sign. You can put your logo on it, you can put words on it, you can advertise your products on it, and that's fine. We love awning signs because they provide refuge from the weather when you're coming and going from these institutions. Next is our blade signs. And blade signs are also called projecting signs. That's your ones that stick out perpendicular off a building into a street or right-of-way or sidewalk area or maybe a pedestrian passage. So the terminology has been shifting over the last decade, and blade has become the more common term rather than projecting, although you can still use both. So we just went ahead and went with what the current national standard is for that and used blade sign. So we talk about how you can have these, and these are especially great for businesses that are in a walkable area like downtown or neighborhood mixed-use district. The next one is a canopy sign. So this is the example I have there where it's got the delicious burgers and arcade on there. So canopy would be like a flat roof system. You know, it sticks out from your business that covers the entryway and hangs out there, as you can see the way the graphic is done. And then you put a sign either on the facing of it or on top of it. And that's a canopy sign. And that's how it's different from an awning. It's really basic. And then all the regulations there with these ones, including height limit, width limit, and so forth. Then we have iconic sign. This is a new type of sign. This is something we've not had before. I'll give you a great example, Hard Rock Cafe. Oftentimes you go to a Hard Rock Cafe and they got a guitar. That's an iconic sign. That's what it is. It's something that's meant to represent something related to the business, right? So we put a pot on there, and maybe, you know, in this example, this is a place that sells pottery. So, you know, they have an iconic sign that's a pot. The standards for that are also pretty basic, and basically keep it above the sidewalk and keep it away from the curb. The next one is a marquee sign. This exists in our current regulations, but the standards for it are very unclear. We don't have any functioning currently within the city, but maybe we would have one again one day. So we should be ready in case a business wants one. So here are all the standards for a marquee sign in case we have one of those entertainment venues to open up in the future. The next ones here are some of our more popular signs. So we have monument. These are ground-based signs. So this is probably, besides wall signs, this is our most common sign that we have. That is our on-premise signs. And so a couple of things have changed here, and I want to just call out things to pay attention to on this. So the height changes by district, so you'll notice that with some of these signs. Like the rules change by zoning district, and that's because they should be different based on the context. And this is a good example of that. So in highway commercial and industrial technology, where you probably have faster moving vehicles or bigger properties, you can have a taller monument sign. But in main corridor, it's got to be a shorter sign. And then in all other districts, they're much shorter. Here also, it talks about these are in lieu of other sign types. So you can have a monument sign, but then you can't have a pole sign. And it works in the inverse too. If you have a pole sign, you can't have a monument sign. So you got to choose one or the other. There's also things on here about the certain land uses. So medical institutions, our hospitals and so forth can have more of these than other businesses would be allowed. And that's because of the nature of how they're developed and making sure that people find the entrances to our hospitals. Religious uses also get a special rule because it's very common for a place of worship to have a monument sign out in the yard stating what the place of worship is, what their denomination or certain sect is. So there's also an exemption for that. Then there's a height exemption for multi-tenant shopping centers. And the reason we do that is to try to encourage those multi-tenant shopping centers to do a monument sign rather than a pole sign. Monument signs are less of a safety hazard than a pole sign, so they require less review and less care and maintenance than a pole sign does. And if you talk to Lou Spatafor about the cost of replacing his sign at Country Club Shopping Plaza, he'll tell you pole signs are not cheap to take down or to put back up. And the same thing happened with, if you're familiar with the Exxon on East Grafton Road, they used to have a pole sign that was over 120 feet tall. And then they found out nobody could see it from the interstate. So they built that really tall sign for no reason, and nobody could see it anymore because of the tree canopy and everything else. So they did not find it cost effective to keep it or to try to replace it. Instead, they put in their 20-foot tall sign they have now. They made a much shorter one, and they were very happy to find out that actually it saved them a lot of money because they were originally trying to get a new 120-foot in, and then they were like, oh, well, there's no point in it because they're very pricey. The next one is a pole sign. So these are the ones that are elevated above the ground. So and there is a minimum height for these, and that helps distinguish them from monument signs. Sometimes people build a monument sign and it's barely elevated off the ground. So then they're like, wait, is that a pole or is it a monument sign? Well, now it's very clear. If your sign doesn't start until, at least 7.5 feet off the ground, then it's a pole sign. It's always a pole sign. So makes that very clear for everyone. There's also another height exemption here for multi-tenant shopping centers. This is a first that we've done this. I would not encourage any of you to go read our current multi-tenant sign regulations in the code. That's the part that makes all of our heads hurt the most, and it drives everyone crazy because it's like, well, it could be 1.25 square feet or 1.5 square feet or 1.75 square feet. That depends on your frontage width of the establishment that you have, but then based on number of tenants, you can get more signs on your pole or monument sign, and your size area can increase by 25%. But then that doesn't count for your wall-based signs or your sidewall signs. It's just a nightmare to read through. So instead, we just thought we'd make it nice and simple for everyone. And we say, okay, these multi-tenant shopping centers can just have a little bit taller pole signs so they can fit more on there, right? And so that's made very clear here to just make that easier for them rather than having a bunch of exemptions that are really hard to navigate. There is also for pole signs, there is a prohibited area, and this is based around our more neighborhood and pedestrian-oriented areas, so around, Oakwood Road and also the historic district and so forth, which generally the zoning districts there already prohibit those as is. Next is also a new type of sign we've never allowed before. It's a porch sign. It's very simple. It's just a sign you hang off the roof of the porch, on the porch. They're very small. They can be no bigger than 12 square feet. So that's, like a 3x4 area, several sheets of paper worth of sign. And this is especially important because we have many businesses that are run out of home-like buildings, both on Fairmont Avenue, 7th and Oakwood, and so forth. And so this way we can have something that's kind of in character for that style of building if they want it. I'm glad I rolled my windows up. Then we'll move on to, we only got 4 types left that are permitted, require a permit. We're also going to permit roof signs. So these are signs you can put on top of your roof. Now, there are requirements for this and there are limitations. But these are here because this is something folks want. We've also not had a whole lot of opposition to those in the past, and some do currently exist. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'll get to that in a moment because there's another type that's much more common and much more desired. but we put roof signs in here as well. The next one on page 18, which is not shown here because it's different. I want to call that out. And that's a sidewalk sign. So all those sidewalk signs are in the on-premise signs, right? They're on your property or maybe close to your property. They're the only on-premise sign that's exempt from a permit. You don't got to get a permit to get a sidewalk sign. But we wanted to put these here, and it's recommended to put these here because this is where most businesses are going to go to find their sign regulations. So we just went ahead and put it right here with the rest of their regulations. So they go, oh yeah, I want one of those too. How does that work? And we clearly spell out how you can have a sidewalk sign. Most of this is about making sure that you don't block the sidewalk, you don't block the entrance to a business, and you also don't put sidewalk signs out in front of the neighboring businesses and try to take up their sidewalk space in front of them or other things like that. So you got to keep your sign close to and in front of your business and near the entrance, but don't block the entrance. That's basically it. Very simple with the sidewalk signs. And we do only allow one sign per establishment, per right-of-way frontage, per 15 feet of right-of-way. So if you had an area wide enough, you could actually have a couple of these signs. But we also don't want somebody who's maybe got a 10-foot wide storefront putting 3 of these out there and just stacking the whole sidewalk with it, making it a nice little obstacle course for the kids. We'll just want to try to keep it at a healthy amount of signs out there. And then we do also put a note in there that if there is adverse weather like high winds, we expect them to remove the sign from the sidewalk. That is an expectation we have. Next is a new type that we currently do not have in the code. So this is on page 19. It's a skyline sign. Skyline signs are signs that you put on the top of a building. We have them all over town, and they're prohibited. And they've always been prohibited. And I've never had anybody complain about them. And they're also very common everywhere else. And the best example is West Banco. They got the giant West Banco logo on the top of their Watson building, right? But in no way is that intrusive or have any negative impact on any other nearby land use. It's almost iconic. You come down the Gateway Connector, you can see the West Banco sign on the top of their building. This is also something they're here in the city. You'll find them around here, but you drive to Bridgeport, right? You'll see the law offices and the engineering firms. They do skyline signs where they put the name of their firm or their company on the top banner of the building. And that's all this is. So this now just legalizes that and sets clear standards for how to do a skyline sign. Then we also have our very popular, the one we get the most, a wall sign on page 20. Pretty much nothing about this is changing. Other than wall signs are mostly just regulated by, they can only be 90% the width of the building. So this way, like your whole building's not a wall sign. You just bring it in a little bit from the edges. They can only stick out from the wall 1 foot. That's just so the structural components of that are much safer and simpler and don't intrude on anything. And this way you can't make a wall sign that somehow gets past the canopy rules or the awning rules by having it stick out 6 feet. So we say it can only be a foot out from the building. But other than that, everything about a wall sign remains generally the same as it has. The last sign on-premise signs is a yard sign. This is also a brand new sign type. Once again, we got lots of these nice little businesses, and several of them have signs that are already like this. I think we probably would have classified them as maybe a tiny pole sign or some type of special monument sign, but now we just clearly say, no, it's a yard sign, and these are the rules for those. And this is especially great, once again, for those residential-like structures that we have, because it really goes well with the aesthetic of those. And these are also very limited in size and area. These cannot be very big signs. So that's everything that requires a permit. If you notice, there was one thing in there that everybody gets permits for today, but it was not in that on-premise section. And that is window signs. This is a big change we're making. So the next section, 5.3.10, is permanent exempt signs. A lot of this is not changing. These are existing exempt signs we already had in the code, and we clarify some of their rules about like number and size and so forth. We've added barber poles. So for any of the barbers who might be listening to this or wanting to finally put the barber poles on the outside of their building, hey, they're in here. And you don't need a permit, but they can't stick out more than 4 inches from your building so that you don't violate the Americans with Disability Act encroachment into a pedestrian walkway if there's a sidewalk or other pedestrian path there. But if we go down through all here, so there's a bunch of them, fuel pump signs, fuel canopy signs. We have rules on these. They're also not very clear how we regulate them, so now we do. Very clear standards for that. Let's just go all the way, if you go to page 23, whole bunch of other stuff, government signs, memorial plaques, menu boards. Don't worry, menu boards, they're still regulated by size and how many you can have. So this way we don't get drive-throughs with 16 of these down the drive-through lane. And then so on and so forth. And there's all these other things that we often don't think of, but they do need regulations. One of the most common ones is parking lot directional signage. It's really important. We don't want that to end up becoming a loophole for folks to get advertising, a bunch of advertising out there on a directional sign. So we just make clear rules about those and how big they can be, and also so they don't obstruct the view of motorists and increase the chance of collision. But if we go all the way to page 24, the very last letter in this section, letter Z, is window signs. And we are making those outright exempt from requiring a permit. We are also changing the regulations on them, saying that they cannot occupy more than 30% of a window. Now, the current rules are that they can't occupy more than 25%, but any words or letters have to be in the top or bottom 10% of a window. So you could only do like a graphic without words in the middle area, then all your words have to be at the top and bottom. Go find me a business that complies with that in the city, and I'll give you $20. Good luck. So nobody puts window signs up like that. The other thing is these are just vinyl clings. These are just vinyl stickers made by these sign companies, and they just roll them up in the window. They're not a safety hazard. They're not going to fall off and crush a customer trying to shop for, bread in the bread aisle. They're not going to peel off there and take them out or anything like that. So what we are actually worried about with window signs is, are they blocking the view to the inside of the business? This is a planning theory that's really important. And so it's called eyes on the street. And it's also called active pedestrian areas, where it is better to be able to see into buildings and to see that there's an active business or folks living in a house or so forth, to at least know there's activity. It helps people feel safer and more welcome when they're out in the public realm, out and around and in front of the building, like on the sidewalk or in the street and so forth. So it's very important for businesses not to be opaque, actually for them to be transparent and see-through. And so that's where we're like, okay, well, as long as you don't cover up more than a third of the window, then we don't mind what window signs you put in. And we don't mind what they do with it. So as long as 70% of your windows see-through still, that's all we're worried about. This also means that window signs are now exempt for the very first time from the historic regulations within a downtown historic district. In my 5.5 years here, HPRC has never turned down a single window sign. They've never even questioned one. It comes up on their docket and they're just like, yep, it's another vinyl window cling, and they approve it. And I can't find any reason, any precedent, any study for why we need to regulate them any further than what this recommends here. Let's just make it easier for businesses to get these up, and they can switch them out constantly anyhow. So this is a huge win for local businesses and for us in our office. This is a lot of the permits that we review are window clings. That's all they are. I do also want to make note, a window sign is different from information. So addresses, telephone numbers, contact information like that, those are not window signs. Like if it's just building information, those are different. And that has its own set of rules earlier in this section. But we're very excited about that. Next is going to be the temporary exempt signs. So this is everything like your construction signs, your opening soon banners. There are also a lot of signs in here that we have never regulated before, but they exist. They are out there. And we actually have even seen several of them, and we've never had rules for how we regulate them. So we thought the national standards recommended to go ahead and include these, so we did. But you'll see if you read through these, I'm not going to go through it one by one, but we cover each of these pretty well, and they have generally the same standards across the board. So they're very universal in their application now. Before, we had special exemptions for maybe the content on the sign, or maybe where you put it, or when the event was, or maybe the event was a long, ongoing event and it didn't have like a final day or anything, and so then you had different timelines, and we've gotten rid of all that. It's just almost 30 days, 35 square feet, so on and so forth with all these signs. The new ones that are in here, though, are a people sign. This is, you see somebody standing out there and they literally like wear the sign. You know, it almost looks like they're wearing a sidewalk sign. It's kind of ridiculous, but that's a people sign. That's a new thing that folks have been doing for a while, so we probably should have regulations for it. Now, something else that's emerged is called a projected image sign. So a lot of companies are now taking projectors and doing temporary signs with them. So how do we regulate that? Because if somebody, you know, in case somebody wants to do it or starts to do it, we should probably have clear rules on how we do that. So we got that here. We've also gotten kudos from the Board of Realtors and for the next one, which is real estate signs. So we've made some amendments to that. Most importantly, you can have one for sale sign at the property, right, per street frontage. So if you have a street corner, you can have a couple. The other thing is you can now also put one wayfinding sign that's limited in size and area up to one intersection away. So you can't string them out, right? If you got a house for sale on Coleman, you can't be putting signs on Gaston, Virginia, Fairmont Avenue, Joe Harry, and, you know, 9th Street. You can't do that. But you could go one intersection over and say, hey, there's a, you know, a house for sale by our company this direction to help people get to that. That's something realtors are already doing, but it was technically prohibited. So we thought we would just go ahead and codify it and also make very clear standards so no real estate company is getting ahead of the others and everybody knows what the rules are and it's very clear for them. We've also increased the real estate sign area for commercial real estate and commercial businesses because that's common anyhow. They, you know, I'm sure we've all seen a black diamond real estate sign. They're huge. They're very big. But a lot of other companies also want to put bigger signs up for bigger properties or commercial areas. So we do kind of distinguish between residential land and residential uses for sale and then other land that's for sale and the type of, the size of real estate signs you can have. That's it for the changes to temporary signs. The very last section is one page. It is what we call off-premise signs. This is billboards, right? Essentially, the changes here are that we're not changing where billboards can go. Currently, they're allowed in industrial and highway commercial only. They're not permitted. No one can build a new billboard anywhere else. We do make billboards a conditional use permit type use where you have to go to the BZA and get approval for industrial. The reason we make that change is because we're also making the rules in industrial a little more flexible for them. So this is now going to allow them to maybe do a wall-mounted one or a roof-mounted one, and there are lots of rules about how to do that and how these work, but we just created a little more flexibility, so we thought it was important to do a conditional use permit because that's the way we handle things to make sure that a use could impact something negatively or it couldn't, and the BZA is where we go to try to assess that and make sure that before we approve it, we've really vetted it and it's not going to be a detriment to anyone's health, safety, welfare, or their right to enjoy their property. But other than that, everything else remains generally the same with the billboard regulations. The one note about that, and just so you're not surprised like later, is that I don't think this was the time to do this, but probably down the road, what I would like to do is take these out of the sign regulations, and really what they should be is a land use regulation themselves, like a permitted use, the way we regulate like car washes and a laundromat and a retail store. because they're a land use. They're not an accessory necessarily. They're usually their own thing. And a lot of modern zoning codes have started doing that as well. I think that would make it a lot clearer for everybody. So in case you're on council a year or two from now, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and you see me bring something forward that has something like that, we were already thinking about it, but we weren't ready for it. So we just kept it like this for now. We didn't want to make any big sweeping changes to these at the moment. So that was a lot of information. I do not expect you all to be able to be sign experts at the end of my not brief presentation on this. But I do want to make sure that there are time for questions. I'll do my best to give answers as possible. This is really complicated, so also there's no silly questions. This stuff gets pretty wild when you dive into it with sign regulations. There's a lot of folks out there who make recommendations on it, all kinds of different organizations and studies. And before we open it up for questions, the other thing I want to make note of is if these are adopted, so if you all adopt this as council, this is our draft sign permit application. I know you can't see a whole lot there. The first page is all the basic stuff, who's applying, what's the cost, so forth. Page 2 is a quick reference guide. It literally lists every single sign that requires a permit. And if it's not listed there, you don't need a permit. And this way somebody goes, oh, wait a minute, I don't see my sign type on there. Well, guess what? Probably because you don't need a permit for it. Or it's banned, but probably not. You probably just don't need a permit. And there's also the very clear standards at the bottom there about pedestrian pathways. What do you got to keep open and clear? 7 feet up, 4 inches out from a building, 5 feet in total width of walkway. So we make that all very clear. And then the page where you actually start filling out the information, so page 3, you will fill this one out as many times as you need to because you can apply for multiple signs. You're allowed 2 signs per establishment per street frontage. So in other words, you could have a wall sign and perhaps maybe a skyline sign, right? So you have one on a 5-story building, it's really high up, and you got one down at the ground level, everyone can see. So you can have up to 2 signs. But then if you're on a corner, you could have maybe a projecting sign and a wall sign on one side and a wall sign on the other and a skyline sign on the other. So you can get multiple signs. So when you apply for those, you just make copies of that page and you fill one of these pages out for each sign. And it walks you through it. Like you check mark which sign type you think you're getting. You then tell us how wide is it, how tall is it, and then its total area. So we just follow the formula for the math there. And then there's the other 5 regulations, which if you read through are pretty common, such as setbacks or vertical clearances and so forth, that relate to the signs, and you fill those out as needed. Then it goes into the illumination. Is it illuminated at all? Illumination is really important. We make a note there that if it is illuminated, you have to submit electrical plans for the building official to review. That is a requirement. And then we even put a little spot there at the bottom. They can make a little sketch of what they're going to do. So they don't always have to have an architectural rendering of their sign. They can just doodle it on there and tell us what everything is. But the other thing that's really great is in the top right corner, we get the maximum sign area already listed. So for every zoning district. So as you're filling it out, you already have your reference there of well, how much signage can I have? Oh, okay, right there it is. The city told me I was in main corridor commercial. I can have 150 square feet of signs per establishment per street frontage. That's also very important because for all those multi-tenant buildings, like the Crawford building, there are several businesses in the Crawford building. So the building shouldn't have a limit. Each business has a limit, and that's really important. So this is a much more streamlined application as well. The building official and the planning staff have all reviewed it. They're very happy with it, and we think this is going to make our life a whole lot better, and hopefully the businesses and sign manufacturers as well. So this is the kind of results we'll get should this code be adopted, is we'll have this type of easy system for everyone to kind of work through. So with that, I want to open it up for some questions from you all as council members pertaining to this very small amount of information that I've given you.
I have several questions. Will these changes, and if they will, affect current businesses that we have, are we going to have to have folks change maybe something that they already have as a sign for their business? And the other question that I have is, we have a few of businesses that I don't know what it is, some type of washable paint or something that they like to do on the inside or outside, for that matter, of their building, and it takes up more than 30% when, is that some type of washable paint? What is that?
Yeah, so that last part there it would qualify as a window sign. So window signs are not only vinyl clings, but they are things you paint or marker with a paint marker onto a window. And so we would regulate those, and we'd be like, hey, you can't just basically paint over your whole window with that type of paint. And you also it's gotta be for an active business. So if that business goes out and then they keep that in there, we gotta ask the building owner to wash it off the windows. But it is easily removable and is something easily that can be fixed. You can usually just take a rag and wipe that stuff right off your window pane.
But something like that would be regulated.
Yes, so that would be a window sign, and so it'd be subject to those rules, that 30% maximum. And this way also, once again, it's another flexible thing where businesses don't have to go and pay. I'm not saying don't support the sign companies, but you don't have to go pay Fast Signs or JD Signs to get a vinyl window cling. You could just get one of those paint markers and, make a great little decoration or talk about your most recent deal or special. You got a shrimp po' boy for $10, and that's all you want to put in your window, and it's less than 30%, go for it. We want you to run your business your way, and as long as you are generally the same as everyone else. So that would be allowed. Yep. Now, for existing businesses, I get 2 points on that. First is we have the non-conforming rules. So if by chance something exists now and is outright allowed, we allow it today, and then this code were to make it non-conforming, so it no longer meets our requirements. Those non-conforming rules protect those businesses. They're not forced to remove those signs the day we adopt this or anything. They stay. And we have very clear standards about when they would need to remove that sign. So they would have to go to alter it drastically, like increase its size or area, or do something, and we outline what those things are, which would then require them to remove a non-conforming sign. So nobody would lose their signs or anything the day this would happen. Now, to elaborate on that further, I think everyone is familiar with some businesses that have a lot more signage than others. And typically they're around retail items that are marketed, such as like vape pens, cigarettes, and so forth. Now, it does fall under both window signs and temporary signs. I will tell you, as of today, none of those signs meet our standards. We've just been being very light-handed with those until we knew exactly what we wanted to do going forward, because we knew we were going to make changes. So we are going to very friendly approach those businesses, talk with them, and several of them, we actually went back a couple years ago and spoke to them. We're like, hey, just so you know, you're going to have to, take some of this stuff down. You're going to have to limit it going forward. And so that will be something. And so those would be the only businesses that I can note today that have something coming. And it's not that we're changing anything. They're already prohibited. We just wanted to make sure we knew what we were going to do before we took action to ask them to start removing some of those and limiting how much they're putting out. So I wanted to be completely transparent about that. So if you are one of the folks who don't believe a vape business should have 24 signs on their front wall, we're going to reach out to those and talk with them and ask them to try to rein that in a little to be compliant with our sign code.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking with the 30-day. They could say there's another special every 30 days with some of these items that are for sale. But okay.
But you're only allowed one special event sign, so they could have one sale sign, and you can only have 30% of your windows covered. And then after that, the rest of those would be non-compliant. So they'd still be allowed to have some, right? But it would be much more limited than what it is today, or what some of them are doing today, but not allowed. So we'll just make that even for everybody. And you could still have your special sale sign, but only one of them.
Okay, thank you, Shay.
What if it's just for general decoration, like holidays. I've seen businesses, storefronts do that.
Seasonal decorations and anything that is promoting like a idea or celebration or anything like that that is non-commercial in its nature, right? So you're not in any way promoting a product or service is outright allowed. So don't worry, any type of holiday decorations, or someone wanted to put a bunch of fishes all across the front of their building and dangle them there to celebrate Feast of Seven Fishes when that comes up, that'd be more than fine. So all those things are exempt.
Why'd you look at me like you know?
I knew you'd have a question, and that's just because I appreciate you serving on our planning commission as well,
Yeah.
and working on this with us.
And we have talked about this, but the electronic message centers, and the city just put up a really nice one over at our customer service center that I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on, but it is not permitted in that district.
Correct. And so there is one. That is a good question, because you're making me actually have to go through the regulations and check something.
Because in 2 years from now, a new business in that district or similar districts isn't going to know when the city put it up. They're just going to know, oh, the city has one, but I can't.
So we do have, and I do know there are some exceptions on EMCs. Give me just a second here. Oop. Well, it might be.
I know that like East Middle has one as well.
Yeah, so we actually do have a, thank you for that, Mayor. I appreciate the help. Yes, on page 23, so this is under our permanent exempt signs. So government signs, so any sign placed or authorized by a government agency with jurisdiction to place the sign, and they include like traffic signals, legal notices, and other stuff. But they're permitted in any number and configuration, but also the type of illumination, the extent of which is also up to the authorized government agency. Now, the reason we do also that phrasing in particular is because we are Dillon's rule state in West Virginia, which means we gain all of our authority from the state. We can only regulate what they give to us. And in our state, the law says that we cannot regulate a higher form of government. So don't expect us to be telling the county commission what to do with their signs. They're allowed to do what they want. And same with the school board and so forth, and the state, they can do what they want. So this is why we just say authorized government agencies, as long as it's a bona fide government. There should also be, I think there's a more clear exception somewhere else as well. And so I'm going to check on that. Is it here? Well, that's a good question. We put up what would become a non-conforming
Well,
sign.
why he's looking at that, for the benefit of everybody else, because with you serving on planning commission, is this particular item, because you also made that comment of like, you kind of know what I'm getting ready to ask, is this a discussion around this that came up in planning commission at all that you can recall off the top of your
I know Shay and I discussed it because I had a whole lot of questions prior to the planning commission meeting, and then I don't know if it came up. And that sign, I feel like, was installed after the planning commission meeting, and it just really brought it top of mind to me because we had discussed electronic message centers and my thoughts that maybe they should be conditional in city center, because also like a lot of churches have converted to
Correct.
those as they have smaller staffs that don't go out and change the physical letters
Yeah.
on their signs anymore. That may be a conditional.
Yeah, you are correct. The city one did, I think, time schedule wise was installed after, but there's, to your point, several locations, and I just wondered if that had come up in discussion in the planning commission side of it. So thank you.
Now, we did create the exemption for civic uses and sign area. So this way, if a church was in a residential district, they could still have up to 35 square feet rather than just 12 square feet. So we've created exemptions like that. And civic uses also covers libraries, museums, cultural centers, lots of government facilities like ourselves. But I actually don't see any exception for the EMCs related to those uses. So
Would schools fall under that too, Shay, like the churches and the government agencies?
we can only regulate private schools. So that'd be Fairmont Catholic and City on a Hill or school. And so otherwise we can't regulate the Board of Education or Fairmont State University or anything like that. So they would be subject to the same rules as everyone else. So like Fairmont Catholic signs, other than what is allowed for religious institutions, the exemptions they get would be under the same rules as everyone else. And same with City on a Hill. For their school, they would be under the same regulations as any other commercial institution, but if they needed an exception to get more sign area or this and that, the civic rules would allow them a little bit more flexibility.
Councilor Moran, so not because, again, I mean, the message board thing, I mean, it is something that, again, and to your point, we put ours up and you've gotten positive feedback. We've heard it as well. You were highlighting that you thought that potentially it should be, and some of those zoning districts should be, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but so you were thinking that more of it should be a conditional use in certain specific zoning districts. And your view is that it wasn't necessarily something that seemed like you recall that it came up in the formal discussions with Planning Commission. Not trying to put you on the spot.
No, I'm so sorry that I can't remember for certain.
Yeah.
I mean, I can check the minutes. I know that Shay and I, because we talked about like East Middle and all the intricacies
Yeah.
about schools and these regulations. So I can't remember.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Sorry about that.
Any other questions? I think this is a wonderful start, and we all appreciate the work that went into the streamlining that supports businesses as well as residential areas. And this is a great beginning, and then we'll see what comes next in the 2 years.
Yeah, we'll say if there is something we have, the thing I told City Manager Blosser, and I'll tell the rest of you, is zoning code should be a living document. We are human. We're never going to get it perfect. We'll try our best, and as long as we're making changes that are fair and reasonable and meet the intent of our community and the codes that we've adopted here, then we can always make minor adjustments later. So if we do decide that we wish to tweak anything, or if there's one little oversight, we can go back before the Planning Commission and bring minor changes to you all in the future for things like that, like EMCs. Because I did just look through, and I don't think I see an explicit exemption for governments for EMCs. So appreciate that.
Yeah, if I can, because I don't want to seem as to stifle. I mean, this is essentially it is. I would clarify it as like a strike and insert. I mean, it is completely removing the existing code section and reinserting an entirely new section. And so I don't want to minimize that aspect. As you all know, as City Council, I've been fairly stringent in my processes with this. That we had a fair amount of debate, as our team does when crafting your agenda and getting your agenda items put together. It's been my prerogative since I've been here, after talking with you all, of trying to make sure you don't feel like things are put on an agenda before you fully understand them and get a chance to ask questions, but also that then you're going to hear public feedback, and then that may change viewpoint. And the way that a lot of this process works is the Planning Commission has made these recommended changes, and so part of my thought process is then, if there are more substantive changes to this, then that would potentially trigger, the fact of whether or not that would need to go back to the Planning Commission. That's a discussion that I'd have to have with the city attorney related to that. But the other thing that I also don't want to minimize is that, yes, and I firmly agree with Mr. Straight that zoning documents should be a living document. We should be, I said to the news media earlier before this meeting that I think we need to be open to changing things and reforming things and to make things better for folks. But I also don't want to minimize the fact that this is a very significant change. I mean, it is a complete code rewrite. And I get that certain things can come back, but I also want to make sure this is the moment. If you have questions related to this, feel free to throw those out. I wanted to, I don't want anyone to feel like we're trying to quickly wrap up. It's 6 o'clock. Our next meeting isn't until 7. If you have questions, feel free to jump in with them. Again, I think Mr. Straight highlighted there are no stupid questions. So feel free to. I've asked plenty of them through this process. So
may I ask a clarifying
Yeah.
question? Is there a timeline that you would like if we go home and digest this and read through it? If we have questions, maybe not necessarily this evening, you would like to have from council before?
yeah, I don't have a
Okay.
direct response to that. I think that the intention was this moving, I believe, next council meeting of the June 23rd for first introduction, but that agenda has not been set yet. So, I mean, I'm open-ended that if folks have questions or things come up, because this is the other thing too, when you're doing such a major code rewrite, I mean, the other thing to be prepared for, and, you can delay the process too, and you get public commentary around it, and, and you recognize things that maybe you need to go back and spend more time on. I mean, a great example that I'm going to throw up, because I'm sure that there may be folks that will be maybe not speaking to other elements of the sign code, but I could imagine speaking in a public session around those I think are referred to as the off-premise signs, so billboards, which again, there's not a lot of substantive changes in this rewrite to our existing footprint with that. But I'll be, honest with the public and city council. I mean, we've had some recent discussions with Lamar, who is the main advertiser of those billboard signs here in town. And we're working through different component sections of them. Of course, there's, the LED signs associated with them that right now we don't see inside the city that are part of some of those discussions. And again, that's a section that Mr. Straight and I have talked about. I think is something that eventually could come back before city council if it would need to, and before the planning commission and discussion. So that's just a great example of like something that I think potentially there may be feedback on, but is what is going to require a lot more discussion, and I think a lot more discussion in front of the planning commission related to that. So I'm not trying to make an argument to delay the process either, but I wanted to highlight, if folks here have a question, you've got your opportunity. The meeting is live. Feel free to hit with the question if you've got it. And if for some reason you don't feel comfortable, and it's that it would be council's prerogative, I'm certainly happy to I will have as many work sessions as you want. We can publicize those all the time. But I also don't want to belabor the point. If you don't have questions related to it and you feel comfortable with where the presentation you've received and where you're at, I'm more than happy to have that move forward on the agenda as well. But I wanted to highlight because it is a significant change.
I found the change we made, and it was athletic field signs, because we were talking about East West Stadium. So we had allowed for athletic field signs to be EMCs as long as they're only in operation when in use. And then fuel pump price signs are also exempt and can be electronic if they only display the price of the fuel. So those were the two other exemptions for EMCs put in the code. But we didn't explicitly call out governments or schools. So I appreciate that catch. Like I said, we don't always get it the first time, but that is something for us to perhaps mull over. And there, seriously, no silly questions. It's a lot of complicated stuff, and we tell some things qualify and some don't, and maybe we'd look at it a little differently. But and even after we leave here, I'm happy to answer any and all questions. You all unfortunately know I can talk, but I also love being transparent with you all and giving you as much information and the public as I can. So please feel free to anytime.
Again, this is a tremendous amount of work, and we appreciate that. Let's just say there's a one-off. And a citizen or a business, we want to be welcoming, we're looking and being proactive. They can go before the Board of Zoning Appeals. There's a path for any type of variance, correct?
Yes.
Or conditional, I mean, there's a path because this is a tremendous amount of work that is needed. But let's just say there's always the unique situations, because we want.
Yes, I think a great example recently, and so to clarify, variances should always be for a very special situation. I brought up Lou Spatafor earlier, who owns Country Club Shopping Plaza, and so Lou actually came before the Board of Zoning Appeals somewhat recently after his sign was kind of knocked over by the wind, and so he needed to put a new one up. But our rule states if a non-conforming sign is damaged or it's structurally deficient, you got to put a new conforming sign up, not a non-conforming. His old sign was 40 feet tall. Our limited height was 10 feet for new signs in that zoning district. But he has a shopping plaza. It's a very large shopping plaza with lots of tenants way back in there. So that was where our code didn't accommodate for that type of business, really. It did not. And so Lou came before the Board of Zoning Appeals and asked for a variance to have a 20-foot tall sign. So it's 40 foot down to a 20 foot, but also Lou knew that trying to put a 40 foot up was going to cost him a lot of money. So we discussed it at the Board of Zoning Appeals, and Mr. Spatafor was accommodating on all other requirements, the landscaping around the bottom of the sign, the setbacks, and everything else to make sure that it was safe and appropriately built. And then he received that variance, and that was because we had a rule that the board saw was unfair to multi-tenant shopping plazas like that. So we gave him a variance. And now what we did for Mr. Spatafor would be codified for all those shopping centers. So that's where we take those lessons learned and we try to make changes in the future for it. So that is available. And so if we do get something wrong and there is something like that, we're like, oh, wow, this negatively impacts this specific situation in a way we did not anticipate or the code allows for, they could qualify for a variance and take it before the board. Yep.
Thank you.
Anybody excited about a bunch of people signs out on the sidewalk? Folks just wearing, little A-frames and dancing around in them? Yeah, sandwich boards.
We can do that for city council meetings.
Yes.
All right, if there are no other questions right now, do I have a motion and a second to adjourn our work session?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned, and we'll continue with our regular meeting at 7 p.m. this evening.